The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday, slid under my gate like a rattlesnake with paperwork. Violation notice. Immediate removal of unauthorized structures. The unauthorized structures were my house. My barn, my corrals, everything. I'd built with my own hands on 200 acres of Montana grass. The signature at the bottom belonged to Karen Whitlock, president of the Eagle Crest Homeowners Association. She gave me exactly 24 hours to raze the ranch, or face daily fines of $5,000 and forced demolition. I laughed so hard the horses spooked. Karen in her pastel McMansion. Brigade had moved in 3 miles down the road 15 years ago, turning an old cattle lease into a gated monstrosity of beige stucco and 3-car garages. They'd been sending me nasty grams ever since. Complaints about dust, about rooster noise at 4 a.m., about the smell of honest work. Last month, they'd tried to make me pave my gravel driveway because it lowered property values. I carried the letter into the house, poured 2 fingers of bourbon, and opened the bottom drawer of Grandpa's roll-top desk. Inside was the original 1886 homestead, patent my homestead, and beneath it, a folder I hadn't touched in years. In 2008, when the developer was desperate for contiguous land to get his subdivision approved, he'd come begging. County rules required a 640-acre minimum for the planned community. He was 180 acres short. Grandpa sold him those acres on one condition: a 99-year ground lease at $1 a year, renewable forever, with a single clause buried on page 47. If the lessee, or any successor HOA, ever tried to restrict the lessor's historic use of the remaining ranch, the lease terminated instantly, and all 180 sold. Acres reverted to the original owner, me. The developer signed without reading. HOAs never read the fine print when they think they're the ones holding the whip. Last year, Karen's board quietly converted the ground lease into what they thought was full ownership by paying the back rent of $14. Shady, but legal on the surface, except they triggered the poison pill the moment they sent me that 24-hour threat. I finished the bourbon, snapped photos of every page, and emailed the packet to my attorney with 3 words: pull the trigger. At 8:03 p.m., the reversion was recorded at the county clerk. At 8:17 p.m., I changed the locks on the 2 access roads that cross my property, the only way in or out of Eagle Crest. At 9:02 p.m., I raised their rent, not the old $1. New rent, $100,000 per month, due at sunrise, non-negotiable. Or the gates stay locked and the reversion clause strips them bare. The first panicked text from Karen came at 9:45. What is this insanity? Open the gate! I smiled, turned off my phone, and slept better than I had in years. I woke to the sound of helicopters. 3 news choppers circled Eagle Crest like vultures by 7 a.m. Their cameras pointed at 312 pastel roofs trapped behind my cattle guard. No one could leave. The single paved road in and out, built on my 40-acre easement, was chained shut with a new sign. Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Rent due, $100,000. My phone had 187 missed calls and 1 voicemail from Karen that started with shrieking and ended with a slammed receiver. At 8:15, a sheriff's deputy rolled up in a cruiser, lights flashing. Deputy Morales and I went back to high school. He used to help me brand calves. He handed me a court order demanding I open the road to prevent imminent harm. I handed him coffee and the 1886 patent plus the recorded reversion deed from last night. Tell the judge this isn't an access road anymore, I said. It's my hayfield. I'm planting alfalfa today. Morales read the documents twice, scratched his head, and radioed his sergeant. 10 minutes later, the cruiser left without another word. By 9, the Facebook group Eagle Crest Neighbors had melted down. Someone posted drone footage of the locked gate, and my new rent invoice taped to it in a plastic sleeve. The comments were pure art. We don't negotiate with terrorists, wrote a woman who once called the sheriff because my cattle looked at her Mercedes. At 10:12, my attorney called. They filed an emergency injunction. Hearings at 2 p.m., pack a tie. I wore clean boots instead. The courtroom smelled like lemon polish and desperation. Karen sat at the plaintiff's table in a blazer the color of Pepto-Bismol, flanked by 2 lawyers who billed more per hour than most of these people made in a day. The judge, a no-nonsense ranch woman named Clara Red Elk, took one look at the reversion clause and raised an eyebrow. You could feel across the room. Karen stood. Your Honor, this cowboy is holding 900 families hostage. Judge Red Elk peered over her glasses. Ma'am, the only hostage I see is your HOA holding title to land it no longer legally owns. Mr. Callahan, do you have the termination notice? I slid it across. Recorded, notarized, time-stamped. The lawyer sputtered. Karen turned the shade of her blazer. Case dismissed, Judge Red Elk said, gavel like a gunshot. And Mr. Callahan, try to keep the rent demands reasonable. This court doesn't enjoy circus acts. Reasonable, I thought as I walked out. We'll see. Back home, 3 moving trucks were already parked at the gate, engines idling. The first family to break was the Hendersons, the ones who once circulated a petition to ban my windmill because it ruined the view. Their moving truck backed up to the gate at dusk, loaded with flat-screen TVs and those hideous white leather sectionals. Henderson himself, red-faced in a Patagonia vest, waved a cashier's check for $100,000 like a white flag. I took the check, tore it in half, and handed him a new lease, $10,000 per month per household. Payable quarterly in advance, triple net, plus a $50,000 reversion disturbance fee for the privilege of keeping their house on my land. He stared at the pieces on the ground. You said 100 grand total. No, I corrected. I said 100 grand per month for the whole HOA if you paid by sunrise. Sunrise was 8 hours ago. Clock restarted. New terms. He started yelling. My border collie, Cash, sat beside me and growled low. Henderson shut up fast. By midnight, 32 families had signed the new leases and wired deposits. The rest formed a WhatsApp war council titled Operation Fightback. Someone hired a crisis PR firm. Someone else called the governor. A third threatened to burn my barn down. I posted 2 armed ranch hands at each gate. Put the security cameras on live stream. Password protected? Of course, and slept in my boots. At 3:17 a.m., my phone lit up with an unknown number. Mr. Callahan. The voice was smooth, expensive. Victor Lang. Attorney for the Eagle Crest Defense Fund, we'd like to negotiate. Talking costs extra, I said. A pause. Name your price to make this go away. 600 million cash, close in 30 days, or I subdivide the 180 acres into 1-acre lots and sell them to whoever wants to park a double wide, next to Karen's infinity pool. Silence long enough for crickets. You're bluffing, he finally said. Try me. I hung up, rolled over and dreamed of alfalfa and revenge. Morning brought news vans. A GoFundMe that raised $1.4 million in 4 hours. Cute. And a surprise visitor, Karen herself. Alone, driving a white Tesla through the back service road. I hadn't bothered locking because it floods every spring. She stepped out in yoga pants in fury. You think you've won, she hissed. I know I have, I said, leaning on a fence post. Question is how much pain you want before you admit it. She looked ready to spit. Then her shoulders sagged. What will it take? She whispered. I smiled slow. Everything. Karen stood in my kitchen at 6 a.m. sharp. No makeup, hair in a messy knot, clutching a leather folio like a life raft. Name the real number, she said, voice raw. Not the theater. The number that ends this today. I poured her coffee she didn't touch. 450 million. Wired by 5 p.m. tomorrow. Clean title to all 180 acres back to me. HOA dissolved, every covenant erased. You walk away with your houses intact and the clothes on your back. That's the mercy price. Her eyes filled. That's every dime we have. Retirement funds, college accounts, everything. Should have thought of that before you tried to bulldoze my life. She opened the folio. Inside was a single sheet, a signed resolution from an emergency, meeting at 2 a.m., authorizing liquidation of the HOA's reserve fund, the sale of common areas, and voluntary special assessments that had already hit. 1.4 million and climbing. We'll do it, she said. I slid the purchase agreement across the table. Already prepared, already notarized. She signed without reading. Her hand shook so hard the pen skipped. By noon, the wire instructions were sent. By 3 p.m., the first 200 million hit my account. Proceeds from fire sale mortgages. The banks were happy to refinance when they learned the alternative was owning houses on land they didn't control. The final $250 million cleared at 4:57 p.m. At 5:02 p.m., I recorded the deed. Eagle Crest ceased to exist. I opened the gates. Families poured out in a parade of U-Hauls and Teslas, some crying, some stone-faced, a few flipping me off until they remembered who still owned the road. I stood on the porch, with cash, and watched the exodus, until the sun bled out across the prairie. Karen was the last to leave. She stopped her packed SUV at the cattle guard, rolled the window down. "You destroyed us," she said. "No," I replied. "You declared war on the wrong cowboy." She drove away without another word. That night I rode the fence line on horseback. 200 acres plus the 180 returned, 380 acres whole, again for the first time since 2008. The wind carried no more sound of leaf blowers or gate codes, only grass and cattle and the quiet that belonged to my family for 6 generations. I patted my horse's neck and spoke to the dark. "Grandpa," I said, "we're square." "Somewhere out there, 312. Families learned a very expensive lesson. Never try to out-paperwork the man whose people wrote the first ones. And I never heard from an HOA again.